Good morning and welcome to this webinar on OpenID Connect, the new standard for connecting to your customers, partners, apps, and devices. As is traditional with every Salesforce webinar, we show you the safe harbor slide. Please do not make any stock or product purchases or decisions based on the content of this webinar. We can and will make forward-looking statements. Refer to the information on our website, particularly the investor section. So with that, I'm Patterson, Developer Evangelist Architect at Salesforce. I'm joined this morning by Chuck Mortimore, Vice President for Product Management for Identity.
Good morning, everybody.
And a new guy in town, Ian Glazer, Senior Director on Chuck's team.
Hi, everyone.
And we'll give Ian a chance to introduce himself in just a couple of minutes. As always, we are very social here at force.com. We're on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is there. Please follow us. And in fact, you can tweet questions at us with the #ForceWebinar hashtag. We have a Facebook community. If any of you are on Google+, you can find us there as well. And this webinar, in common with all of our webinars, is being recorded, and we will post the recording to the Developer Force YouTube channel. And in fact, that's a really good resource. Go to Developer Force, find all past webinar recordings, sessions from Dreamforce, little hints and tips that the evangelists record, and so on. And finally, there's a LinkedIn group for those of you that like to network with your fellow professionals. So a pretty straightforward agenda today. We'll give Ian a chance to introduce himself, and then we'll basically work through the high points of OpenID Connect. We'll have a bit of an overview. We'll look at the protocol. We'll have a demonstration, and then we'll show, Chuck will explain some of our thinking about where we're going to take these features in the future. So with that, Ian, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you've come from, and what you're going to be doing on Chuck's team?
Sure. So I'm Ian Glazer. I'm about 3 weeks old here at Salesforce.com, but been in the identity industry for a long time. You may remember me from such lovely standards as service provisioning markup language. Most recently, I was running the Gartner for Technical Professionals research team, setting the agenda. I've got a long background in user provisioning, role management, and authorization and privacy. I joined Chuck's team and this organization to have some fun and get back building product. Looking forward to that very much.
All right, and SDML, that was the forerunner to Skim, right?
It was the forerunner to Skim. Spaml. Everyone loves, see, I pronounced it Spaml, but hey.
Spaml.
Yes.
So we hear you're a big Sox guy.
I am. And so you also may have known me from my clock shots on Twitter, and look forward to more of that in the future.
Great. Lovely.
Thank you.
Okay, so Ian, in fact, you're going to kick us off this morning with a description of what OpenID Connect actually is.
Right. So I think for those of you who have an identity background, you'll recognize a lot of the things in OpenID Connect as it really is built on a lot of the learnings of the past, and in fact built on other identity standards. It gives us as developers, as identity professionals, as businesses, a way of understanding who our users are without, frankly, getting our hands very dirty in the identity mess. So because OpenID Connect is built off of an established standard of OAuth 2, it gives people a way of authenticating users without having to deal with passwords and usernames. It's a token-based protocol. But just authenticating a user isn't enough, right? So we've had OAuth 2 for a while. It's widely used, especially in mobile settings. But just authenticating a user really isn't sufficient. We'd also like to know, well, who is that person using that mobile app? Who's actually working with it? What do we know about them? And how can we enrich their experience based on that? So what OpenID Connect adds to OAuth is this sense of an identity token, essentially a way of getting attributes about an individual and do so using sort of modern identity tools. You don't have to roll up your sleeves and learn LDAP. You can, in a much more developer-friendly way, understand who is that person using my mobile app and what can we do to enrich their experience. So why you should care about OpenID Connect? Well, if you're like me as an identity professional, this gives you an opportunity to really focus on business enablement. And by that, we'll talk about some of the use cases that it enables, but these are the kinds that generate revenue for the enterprise, really achieve the mission. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But you can think of OpenID Connect as SAML for our modern era. So gone are the angle brackets, and in is JSON. In is a RESTful representation of identity. And so it's a crude way of thinking about it, but OpenID Connect really does give you a lot of the capabilities that SAML does in terms of providing single sign-on experience, the ability to move attributes about an individual, about a user around, but do so in a RESTful, web-oriented way. If you're a developer, the reason why you care about OpenID Connect is you get to focus on the awesome. You get to focus on that user journey, and you don't have to deal with all of the identity stuff, usernames and passwords and figuring out what certificates you need for PKI, and dealing with LDAP. You get an ability to have higher, strong assurance about who is it that's on the other end of the line, who's using this mobile app, what are these connected products, without having to dig deeply into all of the identity infrastructure. It frees you up to focus on the really great aspects of what you want to bring to bear for the business. And regardless of whether you're an identity professional or a developer, the reason why you care about OpenID Connect is this is what the business wants to do, in the sense of it gives you a way of engaging with both internal customers and external customers and reduce the friction of those interactions. So whether it's the business is interested in saying, look, I want to reduce shopping cart abandonment rate. I want to be able to have people use their own credentials coming from different social networks and different credential providers and easily use them to interact with our services. Now, whether that translates into a reduction in shopping cart abandonment or simply just an ease of use experience, this is what OpenID Connect can enable. So we should just take a moment and think about how we got here. When we started out, identity was something that was owned by the enterprise, that was managed on servers the enterprise owned in enterprise data centers, and it was users sitting at fixed computers, fixed endpoints, working with those credentials, working with those business services. But then we had cloud and mobile. So now we have a large population of our enterprise that's using devices that don't have a fixed position, that are likely not corporate owned, and they're consuming a mixture of services owned by the enterprise and hosted by the enterprise, as well as those hosted elsewhere using SaaS. But this isn't the final point of where we are. Being able to enable a mobile workforce and a mobile customer base is good, but we've got to reach further. And many enterprises are in the midst of this transition of saying, I want to bring everyone into a connected world based on identity, whether it's our customers or it's our partners or even it's things. So we have products and services that are connected that have identity components, and we want to more seamlessly manage all of the experience so all of these different constituents can actually interact. So I mentioned a little bit about the use cases that OpenID Connect enables. The first big one, as I've talked about, is social sign-on, being able to take credentials from things like Google Plus or Amazon and easily interact with whatever the service is, whether that's in a retail setting or it's core business, core enterprise services, doesn't matter. Bring a credential that you're comfortable with, we can make it work. But the other use cases that are really keen of interest to the enterprise, enabling mobile apps. So as we're building out more and more mobile apps, having a seamless single sign-on experience, having a very simple way to get higher assurance about the end user, but not just stopping there and thinking about how do we connect all of the things that the enterprise interacts with, whether it's smart light bulbs to all of the other bits like a jet engine that we may have out there. So OpenID is built on other identity standards, and it starts with OAuth 2 and the JOT and the Jose suite. So what this gives us is actually fairly well tested out and deployed underpinnings for the stack. On top of that, then we have the OpenID Connect, really the protocol suite. And it can start very lean and mean, a very simple way to accept OpenID messages, all the way up to more complex scenarios like dynamic client registration. So if you're really into specs, if you really enjoy canonical versions of things, and your shoulds and your musts and your may all make sense to you, go and read all of this stuff. For the vast majority of you, you're not going to do that. What you're going to do is you're going to probably start with a basic client. If you just read one thing in the spec, start with a basic client. This gives you all of the pieces you need to really get going if you want to roll your own. But for the vast majority who don't want to do that, we have something even easier for you, which is you can just use what we've built in the Salesforce One platform. We've given you the capability of doing both OpenID Connect relying party and being an OpenID Connect provider. So we'll talk more about how this actually gets implemented, but just know that through the services we provide, you can deal with the client side of OpenID Connect, and you can deal with the server side. I think with that, Pat, let's talk a little bit about how this actually gets done.
All right. So I'm going to run you through the protocol. And as Ian mentioned, this is nitty-gritty detail. It's useful to know it's there and to kind of have an idea of what's going on. But most people listening to this are never going to need to interact with these messages directly. And how I'm going to run you through is we've got a client application. Okay, maybe it's some web app that you're writing that wants to authenticate users in Salesforce. So maybe you've got a login with Salesforce button on your website. The end user is, well, the end user with his browser. And the auth server is Salesforce in this example. Now, you could swap these around, be logging into Salesforce from a third party such as Google, but this is the way we're going to drive it this morning. So essentially, the end user clicks on some button at the client website maybe, and is redirected to the authorization server. And this is the kind of request that gets sent to kick off this process. Okay, the URL is the authorization server, the OAuth 2 authorized service there. And we are going through the authorization code flow. Okay, this is the variant of OAuth 2 that we use in this scenario. And we've got an identifier there for the client app, that client ID, and a redirect URI for where we want the response to come back to. We can also pass them state. So as the client, you might have some context that you want to keep when you get that reply back later. And what's going to happen is the authorization server is going to authenticate the end user. End user is going to type in some credentials, give some consent to releasing information to the client app, and then the auth server redirects the client. Now, these couple of steps here are outside the protocol, and that's a great thing. We don't specify how the authorization server authenticates that end user. If you've already got a login established, we can just use that. If you are using username password, that's the most common case, or a stronger credential, this can all take place. But as long as that authorization server has a good idea of who the end user is, it's good, and he can redirect to the client with the authorization response. Now, there's that URL we passed as the redirect URL. Okay, that's where we wanted the reply to come back to. There's the state that gives us some context on what's going on. And this is an authorization code. Now, this is traveling via the browser. It's a short-lived code that the client app is going to use one time to retrieve session information. So what happens is the client passes that directly to the authorization server. And because this is passed directly over what we might call the back channel, it doesn't go via the browser or the end user, we can post that code that we just got, the client ID, and the client secret. Okay, in this mode, the client app and the authorization server have a client secret, so the authorization server is confident that it's not handing out details to anybody that just happens to call in. And then authorization server can respond with a token response, and this is where we have basically it is an OAuth 2 response. If you're familiar with the OAuth 2 protocol, then you'll know that everything that's gone on so far is vanilla OAuth 2. There's two differences here. One is in this scope element, we have OpenID as one of the scopes, and we have this ID token. Now, to fit this on the screen, I've elided quite a lot of it. But if you were to look at one of these responses for real, you'd see that you've got 3 strings of alphanumeric separated by periods. And what this ID token comprises, it's actually not an opaque string in the same way as the access token is. It's got some structure. Okay, it's got a header, a payload, and a signature. And if we base64 decode that payload in the middle, we actually see the core of this ID token. So this is what we're passing around that actually represents an identity. It's got an expiry time. It's got a unique URL referring to the subject, that's the end user. If you're familiar with Salesforce, you might recognize an organization ID and a user ID in that URL, so that uniquely pins down this user. And here's the thing. This is why OpenID Connect exists. This is why you can't just use OAuth 2. It has a reference to the audience for this identity token. Okay, that's that client ID in that AUD field. So this pins down this assertion of identity between the authorization server and the client app. It means you can't take one of these and impersonate the user at another app. And so we've got issuer and the issued at time. But the important thing here is that this token is tied between these 3 parties, the client, the end user, and the authorization server, and it's been digitally signed. So with that, usually the next thing the client app wants to do is to take the access token and just make a regular web services request to this OpenID Connect user profile service. So this is a well-known URL that the client can use with, again, an OAuth 2 request, bearer token, that's the access token it got a minute ago. And in return, the authorization server can send all the usual profile information concerning the user. So in the case of Salesforce, you get that same subscriber ID. You might get their user ID, organization ID, the name, email, all of that good stuff, everything you need to interact with that user. So that's the basic client profile in a nutshell. There are some variations for mobile devices, and we'll actually give you a URL at the end of the webinar where there's an article that basically walks through this flow in, if I may say so, excruciating detail. So with that,
write it, so.
I did write it. It is excruciating. Okay, so with that, we've taken a whirlwind tour of the messages that flow back and forth. Chuck, you're going to tell us how we get started.
Absolutely. So one of the things to remember from what we were talking about earlier is there are 2 different implementations of OpenID Connect in Salesforce. One is the client implementation. This is really how you can teach the Salesforce platform to be a OpenID client of other platforms. Okay? This is if you want to do something like social sign-on, as we were talking about. This is how you teach our platform to become an OpenID client and become a Google application or an Amazon application or a PayPal application. Or if you're running your own OpenID Connect provider, your own OpenID Connect application, you can even use this to connect to other Salesforce orgs if you wanted to, because Salesforce is also has a server-side implementation. So Auth Providers really is this way that you can provide information to our platform and transform our generic client, OpenID client, into a specific client that will talk to a specific provider. Gives you a couple of key capabilities we'll take a look at. One is you can create and update users on the fly using this mechanism. So as we pull attributes off of an OpenID Connect provider, talking to that identity service that Pat just showed you, we can ultimately use those attributes to create a user, create a contact, keep that data in sync, and help you acquire a customer or just-in-time provision a user into your organization or into your community. This will also allow you to link to existing users. So there's a framework available such that if you already have users in the system and you just want to associate them with a OpenID Connect provider, account linking is provided such that you can look up a user, look up a contact, and try and do a join between those two. On the server-side implementation, this is really where we're acting as an OpenID Connect provider. This is built into a framework we call Connected Apps. We'll also be showing you this in a second. This really allows you to run your own client and talk to our services. You can either talk to them as a login with Salesforce flow, so it's using the Salesforce login page and the Salesforce brand, or what's fairly unique about us is that you can also run our OpenID Connect services as your own brand. So if you wanted to run your own OpenID Connect service and provide login with your company name, or just simply single sign-on across, say, your web properties, this is something that OpenID Connect is great for and is built right into Salesforce. In addition, we've provided a number of key capabilities in the Connected Apps framework that we'll take a look at. Authorization of users, so you can use the standard profiles and permission sets within Salesforce in order to authorize users, or you can authorize users in a consumer-style model where that user approves the application on their own. We can control things like the authentication level required to access an app. We may put you through step-up authentication. We can control how often a user has to log into the app, controlling how often something called a refresh token in OAuth expires. And then we can put additional policy or put additional attributes into those identity responses. I think the easiest way to learn about this is actually start taking a look at some demos of what we can actually build though. The first thing we wanted to do is run you through a quick view of what you can do with social sign-on and a little more detail on auth providers. Now, we have in the past run a good webinar on social sign-on, so if you really wanted to deep dive on this topic, get out there and check out the archives, but we're going to run you through a quick example of this. So the first thing we wanted to show you is auth providers. So if you're in Force.com setup, quick find's always the easiest way to quickly find things. If you just type in auth, we can get to auth providers. And what you'll discover here is a generic framework for plugging in social providers. And of course, one of the things that we plugged in is a provider type of OpenID Connect. I'm actually not going to bother going through and configuring all of this. Let's just dive into a particular configuration. Now, what we've done here is we've basically provided a generic OAuth and a generic OpenID client. What you're doing is teaching it to become a Google application, teaching it to become an Amazon application, teaching it to become a PayPal application by plugging in your metadata. Now, in order to do this, you had to go out to Google and register an application. And what Google gives you back is information such as a consumer key. Or in the protocol, this is really called a client ID. Your consumer secret is something called a client secret. You also then have to provide the URLs, 3 different URLs of your OpenID Connect service. There's the authorization endpoint. This is the server that is in charge of authorizing the particular request. There's the token endpoint. This is where you can exchange things like an authorization code in the protocol Pat showed you for a token response. And then finally, there's the user info endpoint. This is that standardized identity schema. You can also provide scopes. What scope of access do you want? These are some pretty basic ones that are standard within the OpenID Connect profile. Here I'm looking for profile information about the user, their email address, and their basic OpenID. But this also, since it is configurable, can be expanded into other things that are specific to a particular provider. For instance, here you might ask for access to the user's Google Plus feed or their calendar or the variety of different Google APIs that exist there. And all you're doing is really configuring and punching in new scopes here of access that you'd like to ask for when you use this particular client. So finally, there's one other important thing to understand. There's something called the registration handler. And the registration handler is a piece of code we generate for you, but then allow you to customize. And this really gives you 2 key things, the ability to, on the fly, create or link to users. And we will give you all of the data that we've acquired from the OpenID Connect provider and allow you to look up an account or look up a user or create a contact and create a user on the fly. And we'll also allow you to update that user on the fly. And this really creates a scenario where simply pointing a user at Google or Amazon, for instance, over OpenID Connect can automatically create that user, create a user and a contact in your CRM system and pull attributes of them and keep them up to date. So just the very fact that the users are logging into your system or into your community is keeping your CRM data fresh and up to date. So there are a few different URLs that you'll want to pay attention to. One's a test URL. This is a good way to get started with auth providers. And your callback URL. This is ultimately where Google is going to send messages back to. You had to put this into your registration flow. Once again, you should go back and watch our videos or our previous webinars on this. But the big one we're going to take a look at now is the single sign-on URL. So having understood that you use auth providers to create a generic, to create a OpenID Connect client to talk to a specific provider, let's take a look at what that feels like in action. Okay. So one of the things that Salesforce Identity and the Salesforce platform is quite good at is allowing you to deploy your own branded login experiences. So here we have a Salesforce community that's been completely branded for our fictitious company, Pacifica, where we like to surf sometimes. And what we're doing here is we're providing not only the ability to log into this to drive things like forgot password, where you're just using the community and having a local identity with that community. You can even register here. But sometimes you don't want to actually create a new identity. You really want to use these social sign-on capabilities. Well, some OpenID Connect providers, like these three across the bottom, make this super easy. So if we were to simply click on Google, we redirect to Google. Google detects I'm already logged in. And here what we're doing is basically approving this app. Remember when I asked for those three scopes in our auth provider? I asked for our OpenID, I asked for the email address, and I asked for the profile. Well, you see what Google's saying here is, hey, they want to know your identifier, their email address, and your basic profile information. So I can approve this, and we will pick up that OpenID profile response and ultimately get this user signed into this community. And it was just that easy. So now we have a new user, a new contact within the system. We can do things like deliver applications to them. But ultimately what that was the user didn't have to go through a registration process, didn't have to create a new user ID and a new password that they're going to forget with your system. They can just leverage a credential they already know and trust and simply start engaging with you or connecting with your organization leveraging this. So just built into the platform, OpenID Connect, you can just get out there and use it. Check out auth providers and social sign-on.
And it's worth mentioning that that social sign-on webinar is really worth watching. We go through it in detail, and we actually have a special guest at the end, don't we?
Yes. We've also got a video that goes into a deep dive on how to configure that we'll show you at the end of the slides here. The next is, what if we wanted to invert that? We talked about auth providers as being an OpenID Connect client. What if we wanted to be an OpenID Connect server? Lots of great use cases for this. You may want to provide single sign-on across your own applications or your own web properties. Use this to deliver to your customers, so customers can actually log in using the system, the platform you already use to sell to customers, to service to customers, market to customers. You can now use that to actually control identity and deliver use cases like single sign-on or your own branded login service. You can really run a login with Google or login with, Facebook-style program under your own brand. So in this case, what we use is the Connected Apps framework. And this is, once again, where we're acting as the server. So Connected Apps is a way to create one of these applications within Salesforce. So we're taking a look at an application I've created. We've gone into Apps under Create Apps, and we've created a new Connected App. And what you'll see here is that the Connected App is really giving us some basic metadata about this application. What is its name, its logo, what scope of access does it want? We're really just getting a few key pieces of metadata registered for the system so that Salesforce has context of what is this application that you're building, what is this application that's trying to connect. So now let's go take a look at what would happen if you had an OpenID Connect client trying to connect to Salesforce instead of Salesforce being the client. So to do this, we're going to show you something we've been working on called the OpenID Connect Playground. And what this is really going to do is allow us to walk through some of these scenarios. So what we really have here is a way to kind of walk through what Pat showed you before on slides and allow you to play with it. Okay? Now, a couple things to keep in mind here. One, this is still kind of piloty, so we're still working out some bugs. But this is out there. You can check out the URL and go out and play with it. The other thing to keep in mind is that OpenID Connect and this complete capability is something that is in our spring release. And if you follow how releases work at Salesforce, which you'll probably understand is we're about halfway through rolling out spring release. So this will not totally work until a little later this month when spring release is out for everybody with all of your orgs. Now, if you happen to have an org on spring release and you're using something called a My Domain, you can already point to this and get going. So I'm going to do a few key things here. One, I'm going to point this at an org that I know is on spring release and specify my login host. And then if you had created your own OpenID Connect client, you could go in and basically copy this client ID and paste it into the client ID field.
And Chuck, if folks are on PreRel org, they could put that PreRel login URL in there instead of the in login.
Well, we haven't tested that, but it probably works.
Probably works.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's good to know.
Yeah, somebody give it a try and let us know in the webinar. So. And you give it the client secret from that page. And now basically what you've done is you've trained your client to be an application that connects to Salesforce. In this case, the OpenID Connect playground, but this might be your Java application or your .NET application or your mobile application. Okay? If you want to create one of these yourself, we've put a little screenshot of what you should put in here. Basically, you need to make sure you have a callback URL of the playground, and just grab a couple of simple scopes like OpenID and the email and profile scope within our platform. So now if we start stepping through the sequence here, we'll see the first thing it does is ask us to log in. So we'll log in with, let's do demo at identity.org, and we'll just get logged in here. And you'll see here that now we're being asked to approve this application. Once again, we're kind of in a standard OAuth flow. Our OpenID Connect playground is requesting permission to access those scopes. So this should feel a lot like when we were a client talking to the Google service, right? We asked for access to email and profile, and Google said, hold on a minute. Like, you're trying to connect to this service. User, do you really want to do this? Do you want to allow access to your information like this? So in this case, we'll say yes and click allow. And now we get a callback. Okay? Now, if you remember in Pat's slides, what we get to our callback URL is a code. So we redirected the user to our authorization URL, and you can look in this code and see how to construct an authorization URL properly. And you'll notice what we get back is a callback with this code. The next thing we have to do is on the back channel, we're going to use our client ID and our client secret in order to prove that we are this particular application and exchange that code for a token response. If I click next, the server goes ahead and sends that information. We basically post that information up to the token endpoint, and we get back that token response that Pat showed you earlier. And included in that is not only an access token we can use with our little demo org here, but also an ID token. And if we peel apart the ID token, we'll notice that it has an audience of our client ID. And remember when Pat was telling you, like, you need to make sure you're using OpenID Connect on top of OAuth for something like single sign-on. You really want to do things like validate that the audience matches your client ID, so you can be sure that the token you're being presented was actually targeted to you. So here we've done this check, and we can make sure that we've made sure that's true. So now we're going to turn around and use the access token to fetch the user's identity. And here you can see we've used the access token. We're hitting our general user info endpoint, and you get standard OpenID Connect schema back, as well as some enrichments that the Salesforce platform does. These attributes up top are all standard things that you'll find in OpenID Connect. We also provide back URLs that you can use your token with. So here's discovery for the various Salesforce APIs. We also can provide personalization information that's standardized in OpenID Connect that you might need, such as the language or the time zone that the user prefers. Ultimately, though, what we want to do is take a look at how we can then go beyond this and start using connected apps to manage this. So if we head back into Setup and we look at connected apps, here's where we can edit the policies around this connected app. There's lots of different things we can do. Let's take a look at some of them. One of them might be to make sure that admin users are pre-authorized. So let's go ahead and select pre-authorized. Now, what does this mean? This basically means that instead of going through that consumer OAuth style flow where the user is hitting accept to allow this, now administrators in this org are going to be able to determine who's allowed to access it based upon the authorization constructs you already understand within Salesforce, profiles and permission sets. So we save this and now go back and try our flow again. What we should see is that we are forbidden. We're denied access. Okay? And we have basically we have a bad OAuth token because we've been kicked out. So if we go all the way back to the beginning and click next, you'll see that we get an error back here that our OAuth app is denied. And this is the part where we said we're still working on weeding out a few of the, we're still kind of pilot form because we don't have all of the error handling properly done. But you'll see in the URL, we've got a error here. So in order to rectify this area, what I'd go in and do is, why don't we actually authorize maybe some profiles for access to this app? So I might go in and say full-time employees and identity users and identity admins and standard users and sysadmins. Right? I decide those are the people that are allowed to use this application. I save this, and we're actually going to we're going to add a couple more because I forgot I'm going to demo something a little later that's probably going to want access as well. And now we've authorized a number of profiles within the platform. So let's try and go through this flow again. Notice we immediately went through that flow, and something materially different happened here. We didn't stop at Salesforce, and you didn't see that screen that said, hey, do you need access to this application? That's because, according to that policy, we inverted the way that the OpenID Connect service was working and basically said, we're going to check on the server to see whether your profile or your permission sets, whether an administrator had granted you access to this application or not. There are also a number of other policies we can put in place. One of the things that you could do as you're developing your application would be to, let's go in here and pull up the developer view of this. I might have said I support PIN protection in my mobile application. So I'm going to check this as the developer, save it. And now if we head back to the manage side, we can start looking at some of the policies we can apply to this application. So for instance, we can control how this application behaves with IP restrictions. We can raise the authentication level with step-up authentication. This might force a user to use a two-factor client in order to log in. Or we could put special session timeouts on this. So if it's a mobile app, we can pass back attributes about what session timeout or pin length we might want. So I'm going to put a 5-minute session timeout and a pin length of 4 on this application. And let's go back, step through our flow, get a little further, and we're going to fetch that identity service. And you'll notice down here in the identity service, we should have something new, which is there's now a mobile policy claim that's been included. And this is instructing the client, hey, you need to put a screen lock and pin protection on this. And what we'll see is if you use our mobile SDK is already hardwired up to our identity services and knows how to interpret and enforce these policies. One other nice thing about OpenID Connect is this ability to have custom claims, not only around these policies that you can configure in the server, but also you may want custom attributes. So for instance, let's say we want my custom attribute. What we're going to do here is basically construct a custom claim that we can pass back to the application. So I can use the standard capabilities in Salesforce to, let's say I wanted to pass this user's profile name and insert. And of course, you can use the formula language. So I might say user profile type. And now we've come up with a custom attribute. And as we save this, what will happen is on the fly, we're going to calculate what the value of this custom attribute should be and pass that back through the identity services. So if we reload our identity response, what you'll see is that we now have another new claim, custom attributes. And you'll see my custom attribute and my user profile type is identity user. So it's really simple for you to not only do things like do single sign-on with OpenID Connect, but also pass critical attributes, pass information like policy to your applications such that centrally in your identity provider you can control this, gather information, and share it out with your other web properties. So great capability there. But what you're going to want to do is go to developer.force.com/mobile SDK, and there's a few key things you're going to want to pay attention to. So the development guide is a good place to get started, also the getting started guides. There's guidance on how to build native apps and hybrid mobile apps. And if you're really, really interested, all of this is open source. So if you wanted to go dig behind the scenes and see what we've done, you can go out to GitHub and fork this and, start hacking.
And I actually direct people to this very GitHub project that are building their own apps, not necessarily even with Salesforce, that are wanting to implement OAuth, because this is a great implementation of OAuth in iOS, and really, really useful resource to have out there.
Yeah. So one of the things we could do quickly as we wrap up is...
You have one you built earlier?
You should have the one I tested earlier. And we can see the experience here. When you fire up this, notice is that you can also just point this at the same way I changed that login URL. You can point this at customerdemo.force.com or your own brand. And once again, those login services can run in a mobile context. So we could go ahead and, once again, log in using OpenID Connect to Google. And there we have a fully functioning mobile client that spoke OpenID Connect to our service, spoke OpenID Connect to Google, and then came back with a full response. And I'll be going to change my password in that org immediately.
Yes, you will. My usual thing is to drag it off the screen, then type password in.
I was a little flustered by the demo not working.
Oh, well. Okay, so let's get back to the slides.
So what's new? There's a couple key things here. Obviously, we're talking a bit about social sign-on, a bit about OAuth, but one of the key things that we've done is finished up and gotten our OpenID Connect service up to the full standardized version of OpenID Connect. And that's introduced a few key things. One, this user profile service that runs with services OAuth 2 user info. And this provides that standard schema we were looking at when we went through the playground and looked in various slides. We've also added in something we didn't show today, but is quite interesting, which is signature-based client authentication. So you notice we were using something called client secrets in order to identify our application. And this really uses a shared secret between, our platform issues it, you copy it into your client, and you have to use this shared secret. Sometimes shared secrets aren't the best, though. So what we've also enabled is the ability for you to go into your application and register a public certificate. So if you come into where you create your application and you say uses digital signatures, you can go ahead and upload a PEM-encoded certificate. And then what you can do is two key things. One, you can use the OAuth assertion drafts, which we did not cover today, but allow you to do server-to-server communication by simply signing JSON messages or signing SAML assertions. Or you can construct a signed JSON document, something known as a JOT, in order to use that instead of a client secret. Now, this may sound nice. It uses private and public keys and asymmetric cryptography. You don't have shared secrets. But what's really powerful here is that because you don't have to have a shared secret, you can actually use our APIs to dynamically create a client and on the fly begin connecting to our platform without having to have an administrator manually carry that shared secret back to your client. The other thing, that big thing that we've introduced here is these ID tokens. These are, once again, a signed JOT. They're basically a JSON document. And you can use these to not only validate that the token was coming to your application by validating that audience, but you can also do things like hand that back to your cloud infrastructure to have your mobile app identify the user to your backend services, for example. And one of the things that we didn't show you because it's not quite live until spring is completely rolled out in our environment, but there's also key endpoint. Because there's a signature on that, you want to turn around and fetch our public keys. Well, now you can publicly fetch our keys in order to validate the signature on one of these ID tokens. That allows you to, in a very scalable fashion, validate these ID tokens in your backend infrastructure without talking to Salesforce all the time. So finally, we wanted to close with what's next. Well, we're doing a few key things. One is custom permissions. One of the things that our customers have been asking us for is, as we're building mobile applications or plugging other web-based applications in your platform, we really like how your permissioning model works with profiles and permission sets, and we'd like it to be consistent. So not only do you want the ability to grant access to the application, but this will allow you to have fine-grained permissioning within the application. You want to build your mobile app and, have control over whether a user sees a particular tab or a particular function. You'll be able to define those permissions within Salesforce, manage them with profiles and permission sets, and we will hand those authorization decisions down to the client applications.
So that's just in exactly the same way as that mobile policy came through, right, in the user profile?
Exactly. There'll be a new OpenID Connect claim, which is called custom permissions, and we'll render all of the authorization decisions specifically for your connected app. That's something that'll go in a pilot in our summer release and be GA later this year. And finally, what we're working on is customization of these ID tokens. So the ID tokens are pretty simple at the moment, but we see great potential to use these tokens for things like, or for concepts like the identity of things. So if what you're really trying to do is take and connect a user to a device, connect your customer to your car radio or your washing machine or the various things that are starting to get plugged into the internet, well, you need to make sure not only that you can identify that device, but also associate it with a customer, associate it with a patient, associate it with a doctor or a driver. And there's a great use for the Salesforce platform because we're a platform that you use to manage your interactions with your customers. So there's a few key things we're doing here. One, we're going to use ID tokens because it provides a scalable and offline way that you can deal with these. Once again, take those ID tokens, hand them to your cloud infrastructure. Let's say you're collecting telemetry data, and you can validate the signature all day long on that by simply fetching our public key once. We also want to provide a spectrum of authentication, so being able to identify not only the device, but potentially this is the exact device that I issued that token to. This is that exact device that I issued that token to, and I trust its manufacturer. We're not looking at, a clone of a particular device or some copyright problem. And finally, we want to provide the ability to provide fine scoping so that ID token can turn around and get a scoped, delegated capacity to act against Salesforce. And what that means is, let's say your washing machine had one of these tokens. You're not connected to the internet. It's, every day it's sending up data. I'm doing fine, I'm spinning. And then your 3-year-old dumps a bunch of sand in it. That washing machine may want to say, file a case, schedule a technician, inform the cloud that something's going wrong. And in that case, you want it to have the ability to talk to Salesforce to get that case log, but you don't want it to have the full capabilities of your identity. So fine scoping and delegation is another thing that we're working pretty hard on.
So identity for the Internet of Things, I feel a new acronym coming on. Isn't that IDIoT? There we go.
You heard it here first. Okay. Pat, you want to talk about where we learn more?
Absolutely. So we've got a couple of articles out on our wiki. So the venerable digging deeper into OAuth 2 on Force.com, I actually wrote about 3 years ago, has had an update now. It's up to date with connected apps and all the features in Spring 14, so it's definitely worth revisiting that if you want to know about the underlying protocol here. I've also written Inside OpenID Connect on Force.com, and that basically walks you through the protocol and the configuration in just a little bit more detail than we did today. It gives you sample responses. If you're actually writing against this protocol, it's really useful to have an idea of what to expect coming back on the wire. Chuck's OpenID Connect Playground is available out there on openidconnect.herokuapp.com, and I can confirm that it does work on Spring 14 pre-release orgs. So if you have a pre-rel login credentials, you can use that straight away. And a couple of videos there linked, the awesome social sign-on video, and we have one on mobile access management, so touching on those issues of how you work with mobile devices. So with that, we have some questions coming in, and so you showed OpenID Connect, standards-based approach, and Google that. Can I use my Facebook credentials? Because they're not quite the same, are they, from the protocol point of view?
Yeah, so the Auth Providers framework, one of the providers we've added into the system is OpenID Connect. So we also have some providers that allow you to plug into other services, such as Facebook, which is OpenID Connect-esque, shall we say, but not actually standardized. So, and we're going to continue to go out and expand the capabilities of that framework, and in a couple of different ways. Of course, working in the identity community to try and make sure that all platforms are adopting OpenID Connect. There definitely seems to be a great amount of nurture around that. But also, tactically where we need to, we fill in the white space and adapt to people's proprietary systems.
And I think the thing here, too, is the ability to actually mediate all this, right, so that we're not exposing some of the pain and suffering of OpenID-esque protocols to you, but we'll take care of that in the back end and just let it roll.
Right. That is the nice thing about Auth Providers is that you don't really care what, you pointed at Facebook, you pointed at Google, we're sorting out all the protocol mishmash to you. What you get back is a standardized set of attributes that Salesforce has canonicalized for you into a standard schema.
So we deal with Facebook, so you don't have to.
Yes.
And I guess if there's additional providers that people are really interested in, they could tweet them at you at Seymour.
They got to follow me first, though.
Okay. Yeah. That's part of the deal. Okay, so another question. I think you actually answered this on the way through. Can we support multiple auth services without branding the login page?
Yes, you can support multiple authentication services. Well, what's the best way to describe it? You do not have to brand the login page. You do have to configure the login page and use My Domain. So My Domain allows you to go in and check a few boxes, and we will service different authentication options there. That doesn't mean you have to change its logo or change anything, but we do need that My Domain so that we have context of this is your particular org within the system, and therefore we can look up your metadata and provide your particular options. But it doesn't require that you actually physically brand it.
Right.
So just check boxes on the My Domain page.
No code required.
Check a box, all declarative, really quick.
Okay. So a more techy one here. So in those flows, we were getting back the access token and the refresh token, but we didn't actually pass a scope in the protocol. What was going on there? How did we make sure that our access token got that the scope that it required?
So you saw in connected apps that you register particular scopes. We started out registering OpenID Connect and email and profile. And then when we ran our mobile app, we decided, oops, we better add in API and refresh token. So when you create your connected app, we really ask you to tell the service what scope of access your client's going to need.
Awesome. Okay, so I think actually we better finish on this one. We're running low on time. If I have my own OpenID Connect IDP, maybe I've implemented one in my enterprise, can I use that to connect my employees to Salesforce?
Absolutely. So the OpenID Connect services work for both employee use cases and customer, partner, citizen, whoever you're trying to connect to, is built for it. Now the difference here is the way you expose them is slightly different. For your employees, you're going to use My Domain. You're going to set up your own. You still have to use customer.my.salesforce.com. You'll have, my large corporation or my little tiny SMB.my.salesforce.com. And you can go into the My Domain page, check which auth provider you want to use. That might be an OpenID Connect auth provider pointing at your own OpenID Connect service that's run for your employees. And instead of showing the login page, we will automatically redirect over standard OpenID Connect over to that service.
Awesome. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for dialing in today. Thank you very much, Chuck, as always. Pleasure to present with you. And thank you, and again, welcome, Ian.
Thanks so much, Pat.
All right. Thanks for listening.